Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Shahida Aslam, and I'm the Director of Operations from the Helena Kennedy Foundation. A very warm welcome to you for joining us today. This week, we're kicking off Career Ready Week, where we are running a number of sessions to help towards your career development, whatever stage that may be at. And today's first session is Communicating with Confidence in the Workplace, which is being facilitated by Lauren Roberts today from City and Guilds Foundation. In the session, Lauren will be looking at understanding the different types of communication and how to process and overcome common barriers when communicating with others. So she'll be looking at the different types of communication, active listening, the skills you need to be a great communicator, and common communication barriers. There is a Q&A section at the bottom, so feel free to pop any questions in there. And this session is being recorded as well, so a recording will be sent to you. And also Lauren is very kindly going to be sending me the slides, so I'll forward them on to you as well. So by way of introduction, I'd like to introduce you to Lauren Roberts, who is the City and Guilds Foundation Youth Engagement Executive. Since starting with City and Guilds 6 years ago, as an apprentice, Lauren's been helping young people to make more informed choices through apprenticeships, internships, and work experience. More recently, Lauren's been focusing on bridging the gap between young people at risk of becoming NEET and employers. And in a role, she also supports and connects the existing beneficiaries of the City and Guilds Foundation, such as the bursary recipients, for whom she's developing a dedicated alumni network. So over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Shahida. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. And I'm just going to share my screen, if that's okay. Exactly as Shahida said, sorry. I just have a couple of slides to share. Exactly as the intro said, it's going to be a session all around communicating with confidence. So just before I get started, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about City and Guilds and City and Guilds Group, just to give a little bit of context about what we do, why we exist, and I guess how we've come to work with the Helena Kennedy Foundation. So City and Guilds Group, we're made up of several different businesses that work globally all across the world that are basically all about helping people to develop their skills. And the kind of strap plan we use is that we help people get into a job. So by studying courses, perhaps at college, or once you've finished doing kind of your traditional education, you move on to an apprenticeship, while you're actually in a job. So if you need to do a piece of e-learning while you're actually at work to be better at your job. And then lastly, on to the next job. So if you need to take part in a qualification or course while you're actually at work to kind of get to the next role, to get promotion or your next role, we have tons of courses through those different brands that you see at the bottom that help you to do so. And we split it into 3 different ways. So skills credentialing, which is about helping you get into a job, corporate learning while you're in the job, and then Gen 2 is based up in Cumbria, and they're all about developing young people to become engineers. So I won't go through all of this, but just a little bit about our purpose. So we always say that through all the work that we do, we help people, organisations and economies develop their skills for growth. And I'm part of the City and Guilds Foundation. And what we do is we work as the most charitable aspect of the whole group. So all of the profit that is made through those different businesses, we reinvest that money into helping serve the communities that we work within. So as Shahida said, I work as part of a couple of youth programs that we work on, where we reinvest the profit to go out and to talk to young people about different routes into their career. So apprenticeships is obviously the one I took, so I talk about that quite often. But then also we award bursaries. So for anybody that would wish to study one of our qualifications, we have a pot of money every year, and we send it out to people that wish to study one of our qualifications but isn't able to due to finances. So as I said, we work all over the world, we work globally, so in over 100 countries and across 5 continents. And we've been around for quite a while. So we were founded over 140 years ago. City and Guilds, our oldest business. And we have a royal charter, which means that we work really closely with the royal family. And Princess Anne, Her Royal Highness, is actually still our patron, and we do tons of work supporting young people and people all stages of their career, which is backed by the Princess Royal. That's something we're really proud of. So today's session is going to be all about communicating with confidence in the workplace. And as Shahida said in the intro, it's going to be split over kind of 4 sessions, time permitting. So the first one is all about different types of communications, the best ways to use them. The second section is going to be on active listening. So what is it? Why is it important, and how do you become really good at it? And then thirdly, what skills do you need to be a great communicator, and what are they? And then lastly, what are some of the common communication barriers, and how can you resolve them? So just to kick us off, just a couple of stats that while kind of putting together this presentation came up that I thought were really interesting. Some of them are obviously really looking at, over the past kind of 18 months, how the world of work and how the world of communicating at work has changed. So things like the fact that Skype reported 40 million daily users in March of 2020 last year, which is up 70% from the previous month, which obviously shows that people were communicating for work for the most part, but also in social ways, in a way that we hadn't seen before. There are a couple that kind of have always existed and will continue to exist around how much of communication is actually what you say, but more about how you say it. So 7% of communication being verbal, so being the actual words that, you know, actually come out of your mouth, 38% of it being the tone and the way you actually say it, and then 55% of it being your body language and how you're actually presenting yourself while you're given that information. I won't go through all of them. Actually, he just said I'm more than happy to share these slides. But another one that I think is super interesting is the fact that every day 306.4 billion emails are sent, and only a third are actually opened. So I can definitely relate to having emails piled up in my inbox from retailers that I subscribe to get a 10% discount and never open their emails again. But that says a lot about the information they're sharing. And obviously, when you're at work or you're trying to find work, you're emailing employers or you're emailing colleagues, you want to make sure that your emails are opened, you know, and that you're there and the person is reading your message. So we're going to have a little think about, how do you make sure that your information that you're getting out is one of those that are actually opened. So different types of communication, as I said, is going to be the first section. And this one I think is really important, because when we went out and we were developing this kind of whole presentation, everybody spoke about verbal communication. And when you ask people, you know, what makes a good communicator, the first thing they say is being able to speak to people, you know, being able to have a conversation, being able to present. And that is super important. But that is not all there is to communicating. And especially when you're in the workplace, you find there are many different ways that people communicate and different ways that people get their messages across. So the first one being verbal and being the most obvious, I guess. And for each one, we've kind of just got 3 top tips to making sure that you're using that method of communication the best way you can. The first one is all about using a confident tone, and that ties in really well to the second one, which was getting a good understanding of the area you're talking about. I think we can all relate to being part of a presentation or having a conversation with somebody, and you can just tell the person hasn't got a clue what they're talking about, you know, or they're reading off a sheet of paper, or the area they're talking about really doesn't have any interest to them, and how much that comes across when you're having a conversation with somebody. And the one thing it tends to do is it makes people switch off. If you're speaking to somebody and you've got no confidence in what they're saying, or you think, you know, they've just pulled this off of a Wikipedia page and have no real interest in it, you're far less likely to actually want to have a conversation. Or to, you know, to keep your concentration with that person if you don't believe what they're saying. The last one there is active listening, which we'll be talking about a little bit more detail later, so I won't talk about that too much now. But basically, active listening is all about when you're having a conversation with somebody or you're part of a presentation, taking in the whole message they're receiving. So looking deeper than just looking at what the person's actually saying, how are they saying it, how are they communicating, and what is the kind of the real message, I guess, in what they're trying to get across. Then we've got written, which is probably the second biggest way, if not the first, you know, going virtually, that many of us communicate in the workplace now. And this can be obviously emails, it can be Teams messages, it can be a WhatsApp group chat that you have for work where you're communicating in a faster way than you potentially would have when you were at work. And a couple of tips we've got for them. So the first one being, don't overcomplicate. So this is one that we see all the time, and people tend to write emails, and especially if you're trying to write an email to an employer, it's all about you know, using the longest words and having the best vocabulary, which is really important. But make sure that you're getting kind of to the root message as soon as you can. So it's great to have a little bit of context when you're speaking to an employer or to a colleague. But something that I always do is I will write an email, and I tend to write emails exactly how I speak. So I will put all of my thoughts down. Before I hit send, I will look over it and think, do they need to know this? Is this information actually necessary in what I want to get across? And obviously, you don't want to come across like a robot, so you need to put personality in there. But just think to yourself, is it the best use of my time to, you know, be writing them this whole story? But also, is it the best use of their time for them to read this necessary information, or could I just simply shorten this? If I have a simple request and I just need a small bit of information from them, or I need some assistance with getting something done, is there an easy way I can put this? Secondly, just around double checking spellings and grammar. So this one's obviously super important, especially if you're speaking to an employer, or you're speaking to somebody where you're, in a professional context where you need something from them. If you're writing a formal email, that's fine, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest having someone double check every email you send, but making sure that if you're sending an email that's representing yourself, so if you're emailing to request an interview or to get some feedback, or emailing to express an interest in a job, making sure you're having someone else double check it. I do this tons. I will write presentations or a document, and sometimes you're so focused on it, you skip over really simple mistakes because you know what it should say and you think that's what it says. And then I've given it to a colleague to read and they pick up on a spelling error or a grammar error in the first sentence. And, in your head, if you know what it's supposed to say, sometimes your mind tricks you into thinking that's what it says. But obviously having someone spend 10 minutes to kind of check over the fresh pair of eyes can be super helpful. And then lastly, just be conscious of your tone. So obviously when you are speaking to someone in person, it's really easy to pick up on how your message is being received. And if you're saying something that may be a little bit sensitive, or maybe you're giving criticism, or it's something that may cause conflict, it's often easier to do that in person because you can kind of gauge the room and see how someone's reacting. Just remember that obviously over email or text or instant message, that's not as easily done. So just make sure that, when you're giving information, you're reading over and making sure that your tone is correct for what you're setting, and that you're not overcomplicating the initial message that you're trying to get out. So non-verbal. So this is all about the body language. So as we said in kind of the first information slide, so much of the way you present information is your body language. It's not what you say, but it's how you say it. So considering your body language and gestures is really important, and even more so virtually. Very similar to kind of the whole written piece. When you're in a room with someone and you're sitting around a meeting table, or you're sitting across an employer for an interview, it's far easier to kind of break the ice and, have a bit of a laugh with them potentially, or just make sure you both feel more comfortable. That's so much harder to do, when you're sat in your room and they're sat in your office, or vice versa, and you've just got a screen in front of you and you're trying to kind of bridge what is the mood like in the room, what is the atmosphere when there isn't a kind of a room as such. So make sure that you're taking extra care when communicating, make sure that you're looking interested, make sure that your eyes are on the screen, you haven't got a million different tabs up, you're not, small little things in the corner of your phone while you're looking through Instagram in a meeting. So just make sure that you're showing the person you're interested, which can often be harder to do when you're online, because it's way easier to be distracted when you've got a screen in front of you than when you're sat in a meeting with only one person in front of you. But just take extra care to make sure that you're showing them that you're interested. And then lastly, just visual. So this one is more about images and using the presentations that may aid you when you're delivering stuff. So not so much in conversation, obviously, but if you're delivering a group project, or you're putting together a PowerPoint presentation, or even a CV where we see people including images in a CV. So kind of the two tips for that would be only adding them if they're necessary and they add value. So obviously everybody loves a nice cartoon picture, or something to break a slide which is just full of text, but make sure that you're only using them if they genuinely add value, and that they're actually there for a reason, because if they're not, they can tend to just distract from the actual information you're trying to get across. And then also make sure they're easy to understand and don't distract from key messages. So I was in a presentation the other day where somebody was putting up a graph talking about youth unemployment, which is obviously super important topic, and they were trying to show how youth unemployment has kind of soared since the pandemic and since young people have been in lockdown. But they had a tiny little graph that was demonstrating the point in the corner of the screen. And as she was going through the presentation, she was actually explaining the graph. But because she put a picture of it there, I spent the whole time trying to read the graph and completely zoning out of what she was saying. It would have been far better if she had just sent us the graph afterwards for us to look at, and let us know in the beginning, or maybe just not included it at all and said, we'll be following up with this image for you. Because I completely lost everything she was saying, which I'm sure was super interesting and would have explained it to me. But because I was so focused on looking at the image, it completely distracted from the actual message, which was super important. So just make sure when you're putting together presentations, have a look on slideshow view. Is it clear? Does it make sense? And is it necessary? If it's so, keep it in. If it's not, maybe think about, do we need this? Or is there a way that we could maybe send it to participants before or after to get the message across without distracting from all the amazing stuff that you want to be saying instead? So the second section we're going to talk about is active listening. So as I said before, active listening is basically the kind of the art of making sure that when you are listening to somebody, that you are completely giving your full attention and that you're understanding the full message that is being communicated. So it's about actually taking in what they're saying, how they're presenting it, and going a little bit deeper than just understanding the words that they're saying. So why you need it. The first one is all about, building trusted relationships. And when you're, at work and you're trying to get you're liaising with a manager or a colleague, making sure that you have a trusted relationship with them is obviously super important. And one of the ways that you can build trust is by when you're having a conversation with somebody, you're taking part in a presentation, showing them that you are genuinely listening, that you care about what they say. It's really easy to tell when you're speaking to someone when they have absolutely no interest in what you're saying, especially at work, and they're simply listening because they kind of have to. And then that feeds really nicely into the second one around helping to avoid confusion and conflict. And this is something that I'm super guilty of, especially, working on teams where you think you're listening to what someone's saying and you think you're taking in and you're nodding along and yeah, it all makes sense. And then you come off the meeting or even in person, you leave the person that's giving the instruction and you have no idea what they actually said. You have no idea what the actual action was. And you have to go back to them and say, sorry. It's fine to obviously say, sorry, I don't quite understand what you mean there. But if the person's delivered a message to you and they can tell that you wasn't listening fully, and you come back to them and then say, sorry, can you please just explain everything you said again? That can obviously be a bit of a productivity killer, which goes to the last one. So making sure that you are getting everything you need from the message from them, so you don't have to go back or you don't misunderstand the message. We're going to touch on a little bit later when it comes to barriers, but making sure that you're fully understanding the message they're giving and you're also understanding the body language and everything that goes along with it. And then encourages you to think about how you present your point. This one's obviously, if you can tell people are actively listening to you, it makes you think a little bit more about how you're presenting information. How are you giving someone an instruction? As the person giving the information, are you making sure that you're listening to them as well and taking on board their questions and making sure that the way you're delivering information sits right with your audience? So how to master it. So just a couple of verbal and then non-verbal points around how to master active listening. And this is obviously something that you develop while you're at work, and obviously something you can do in your personal life too. Nobody likes speaking to someone in their personal life and feeling like they're completely not listening to a word they're saying. So verbally, don't interrupt, say thoughts and questions. Obviously, this is something that you will interchange. If you're having a two-way conversation with someone, these obviously can be relaxed slightly. But if you're listening to a presentation or somebody's delivering a piece of information to you, it can be really hard not to just jump in. And if you have a question or you have a thought or something that you kind of want to bring back to yourself, let them know you're listening, just sit on that for a little while. Maybe wait till there's a natural break in what they're saying and then come in with your thoughts and questions, because obviously it does show you're interested in your listening. But often if you're speaking to someone and the second that you kind of catch your breath, they've jumped in and they're talking about themselves, it can leave you thinking, was you ever listening to what I was saying, or was you just waiting to kind of bring in your own point? Be patient. So obviously if you're taking part in a presentation and you're impatient, and the audience, the speaker can tell through that the audience isn't really interested and they've got other places to be and they're fed up with a presenter who potentially is stumbling or whatever, that can obviously be really off-putting. So be patient with your speaker and show them that you're being patient, that you're empathetic to them. Ask questions to show that you're interested with the conversation. So going back to the first one, think about how you're processing the information and have a couple of questions that you want to ask. And also ask them. So if we're doing a presentation just like she did here, she let you guys know that I'll be taking questions at the end. So they're coming through, which is amazing. And at the end, we'll cover them. Just ask them, if they're doing a presentation, it's not covered. Is it okay if we interject with questions? Would you like them to be saved to the end? If it's a conversation, your manager is saying, setting you a task up for next week, how's the best way they want to be communicated with? Is it okay if you interject with questions, or would they rather you kind of save them up? But if you don't know, just ask, because it's far nicer to be asked than to have someone, jumping in or switching on a microphone while you're trying to do a presentation, or if you're having a conversation and you're kind of mid-flow and someone jumps in with a question that completely steers it the other way. So just double check. And then lastly, summarize what you've understood once the speaker is finished, which is super important. So once you've had that conversation with your colleague or with anyone, and they've given you a bit of information, just kind of reiterate to them, so okay, that's fine. So you'd like me to do X, Y, and Z by this time. Is that correct? And just make sure that the information they've given you, you're relaying back to them kind of in a summarized way, just to make sure you're leaving that conversation on the same page and to stop any of that conflict or misunderstanding once you then go away and kind of are getting on with that task, or go away and kind of do the actions based on that conversation. And then non-verbal, so we have make sure you show eye contact so you're interested. So pretty obvious, if somebody's making eye contact with you, and you can tell they're following where you're going with the conversation, with the presentation, you're far more likely to feel like there is some interest in the room, which is great. Open body language to make the speaker feel comfortable. And then lastly, just try not to fidget or give attention to distractions. So as I said, this is far harder to do, I would say, in kind of a virtual world where a lot of us are working from home and there's tons of distractions around. But if you're kind of in a one-to-one Skype or Zoom or Teams meeting with someone, and you can tell they're kind of looking up here and they're checking emails and they're getting their phone out and they're trying to mute the TV or whatever, that can be really off-putting. So just make sure that when you're having a conversation with somebody, you are in the right space to have that conversation. If you're not, just let them know, you know, take some time to make sure that you're in the right space, to make sure that you don't have any distractions and you're able to give them your full attention and practice that active listening, sorry. So the kind of the second last bit now, guys, which is just what skills you need to master to be a great communicator. So we went out to some of the HR professionals that work within the organisation and asked them for a couple of skills that they think makes the best type of kind of communicator, really. And why, basically, why are those skills important? And these were the top 6 that came out. So some of them I'm pretty sure you'll be kind of familiar with. Some of them may be a bit of a surprise, but these are the top 6. So the first one is confidence, which I don't think many people will be surprised at. But just why, kind of pretty self-explanatory. But if you deliver something with confidence, you're instilling in the people that you're communicating with that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, basically. And it's far more easy to put your trust in someone and believe what someone is saying if they're delivering some confidence and you feel like they know what they're talking about, essentially. Empathy. So empathy is all about, especially when you're delivering potentially sensitive information, making sure that you're considering everyone's emotions that are in the room. So if you're talking about something that may not affect you or may not be a sensitive issue to you, but maybe for someone else in the room, how are you delivering that information? And just making sure that you're conscious of other people's emotions and feelings when you're delivering information of any kind. Friendliness. So I didn't think this would come up, but it came up by several kind of our directors who said that just being friendly is super important, especially virtually. It can be really easy to come across, you know, when you don't have that icebreaker of actually meeting someone face to face and shaking their hand, or, you know, walking to the interview room together. It can be really hard to gauge how friendly someone is over a screen. But when you can tell that somebody's, you know, smiley and they're open, it makes the whole process so much easier, because you almost break that virtual ice by simply just smiling when, you know, when someone joins a meeting, when you're using yourself. So a friendly tone kind of puts everyone at ease, and kind of just helps to get things started, was a big one that came out. Then we have respect. So just the idea of, no matter who you're communicating with, whether you're communicating with somebody who may be, you know, several senior leaders above you, whether you're delegating information down to somebody that you're overseeing at the time, making sure that you're delivering information with respect was also a really big one that came up. And, you know, at the end of the day, if somebody's delivering information to you with respect, you're far more likely to actually want to do what they've asked you to do, rather than someone who's delivering something potentially in a disrespectful manner, which can obviously cause confusion and conflict, and just not a very nice working environment. Cohesion. So just the idea of being able to make sure that the information you're delivering is clear and concise, and it kind of goes back to that not overcomplicating piece. So when you're communicating with people, making sure that you're giving them the information that they need, but that you're not oversharing, you're not overcomplicating, and you're not wasting your own time by, you know, giving them a whole story or writing them a whole essay, but you're also not wasting their time by, you know, making them sit through a hour-long meeting when all you wanted was a 5-minute request. So just making sure that you're giving information in a clear, concise manner, and also keeps people engaged, and it makes people, if they know, you know, I'm going to have a conversation with Shahida and it's going to take 5 minutes, I'm going to get what I need, they're far more likely to want to speak to Shahida again than if they know that she is someone who may take an hour meeting to ask for one request. So just make sure that you're being clear and concise in any request. And then lastly, we just have assertiveness. So being able to get your point across in a kind of a straight, clear manner. So it does link to cohesion, but just making sure that you're being straight and you're taking out kind of all the fluff around stuff. If you have a clear message, or a clear request, you're getting it done in a straight, clear manner, especially if it's information that may not be positive. If you have something that may be that may cause conflict, the worst thing to do is to kind of fluff around it and not be clear and leave people thinking, I don't understand what that person meant. Do I need to improve on something? Am I doing well? So making sure that you are being assertive, but also being positive and delivering messages in a clear manner, kind of leaves everyone on the same page, really. So just lastly, a couple of communication barriers that kind of commonly come up, and just a few tips on how to resolve them. So firstly, we have barriers that come up virtually and over the phone, which is obviously something that I don't even think we would have included in this presentation 2 years ago. But nowadays, it's one of the biggest ways people communicate, both at work and at home in their personal life, as we said. But I guess some of the most common barriers are things like technology failures, which everybody can relate to, I'm sure. And then also just not understanding the environment that other people may be in. So the first one we have is just around making sure that you've got a strong Wi-Fi connection, and that the device you're joining from is working and set up. And if not, just letting people know. So before any meeting or anything, I always double check, is my Wi-Fi working? If not, am I going to need a hotspot from my phone? Can I get that set up before? Is my laptop powering on okay? If I'm going to be sharing any links in a meeting, do I have those up already? And if not, just letting people know. So there's nothing more frustrating than, if you've prepared for a meeting, you think there's going to be, 5, 6 people turning up, no one turns up and nobody lets you know, and you're kind of just sat there 5, 10 minutes past the meeting time thinking, where is everybody? And then you start to get in, 15 minutes after the meeting started, oh, sorry, my Wi-Fi is not great today. If you know that you're going to be facing any kind of issues, just let the person know, let the person know beforehand, my Wi-Fi is not great today, or whatever it may be. And then appreciate that far more than, joining a meeting. Like, obviously it happens and you can't always preempt things. But if for example, you're having a bad Wi-Fi day, or, home is super noisy or whatever on that particular day, or you won't be able to get into the office to join a meeting, let people know beforehand. And it saves that initial, it kind of sets them up so they know what they're going to be going into, and they can also maybe take their foot off the pedal a little bit if they know that you're running late. And then secondly, just setting yourself up in an area where you're unlikely to be disturbed. So this one can be really hard depending on working environments. I myself am working from home since last March. I live with my entire family, siblings, parents, and it can be very noisy here, having sisters that are sitting in uni lectures, parents that are working from home, but just letting people know I'm communicating, and making sure that I've got all the necessary equipment is really important. So if I'm in a meeting and I know that everybody else is also in a meeting at that time, making sure I've got headphones so I don't have to kind of mid-meeting say, oh, sorry, I need to, turn off my video and run around my room looking for a pair of suitable headphones. Have all that stuff there already and double check they work. Having a microphone, built into your headphones is super important. Having a headset potentially if you're going to be on non-stop calls, but making sure you have those beforehand and just communicating with the people that you're going to be meeting with virtually. Can work really well, and it kind of just sets the scene that everybody understands, and everybody does understand that not everybody has a home office at home they're able to work from, but just letting people know what your situation is, and that you will be joining goes a long way. So secondly, we have lack of clarity, which is a big one, and often comes up a lot, just around people leaving a conversation and having very different interpretations of what actually happened in that conversation and what the actions were. And it's one that kind of I see almost daily, of people just understanding things differently or not giving a message in a way that means that everybody leaves on the same page. So how to resolve that? So the biggest one that I would say is the use of jargon, so using technical terms or using acronyms that make sense where you work, for example. So working for City and Guilds, there are a ton of educational acronyms that make sense to absolutely no one outside of work. I don't even know half of them myself as I work in the foundation. But I've been in tons of meetings where people will use acronyms or use jargon or use terms that I have no idea what they mean, and all it means is that I just turn off because I can't keep up with Googling what they mean to keep up with the conversation, and you just end up turning off. So try not to use jargon, try not to use industry specific terms. I mean, if you're speaking to your manager or colleague who, every day does a very similar job to you, that's obviously fine. But if you're going to an interview and you're entering a new industry, for example, and explaining something you've done, just explain to them, what does this term mean? Or think about, do you even need to use it at all? Can you explain it slightly simpler? And also on the flip side, if you are receiving information, somebody is using acronyms or jargon that you don't understand, don't hesitate to just ask them, because often people forget that not everybody has the same knowledge as them, and when you've been doing something for a long time, you just assume that everybody knows what these acronyms mean, when often they don't. So don't hesitate to ask and just say, sorry, I'm not familiar with that term. And then obviously once you've done that, you then know that term too, which is great. Make sure that you're giving everyone the full story, and this one ties in well to the third one, sorry, because they kind of go hand in hand. So make sure you're giving people context, and when you're inviting someone to do something for you, where you need a little bit of help, make sure that you're giving them the full story, so they fully understand what the ask is and what you actually need from them, why do you need it. But on the other side of that, going back to kind of the very first slides, you don't want to overcomplicate it, and don't give them information overload. So if you need somebody to provide you with an email address of a hiring manager because you would like to send me your CV, it's fine to just say something like that. You don't need to add paragraphs and paragraphs where the person has to sit and think, what is the actual ask of this? But give them a little bit of context. So you might want to say, I'm interested in applying for this role that I saw on your website. I know you're a colleague of this person. Just think about setting a little bit of context so they understand what the ask is, but at the same time, don't overload the information, because as we've kind of said before, when you're faced with tons of information and you don't know what the ask is, it's very easy for you to just think, I'll read that email later, or I'll respond to that, Teams message later, and then you never do, because other things take priority. So make sure that you're giving them the full story, but keeping the important bits in, and making sure that you're highlighting the actual takeaways from a conversation. So enter the conversation with, once again, what do you actually need? So, just to clarify, it would be great if you could send me X, Y, and Z by this date, just summing up exactly what you need from them. So next, we've got difference in perceptions and understanding, and that kind of does go back to the whole lack of clarity, and just remembering that people have different experiences, and people can, hear the same message and interpret it very differently. And obviously, if you have information that you're giving out to people in a meeting or a briefing of 5 or 6 people, how do you make sure that regardless of their level of understanding, everybody's got the same perception of what you need done? So the first one would just be around making sure that you take in everybody's opinions, whether it's a two-way conversation or a group project. So this is obviously far easier to do in a two-way conversation. But when you're working in a group, how do you make sure that those that are slightly more introverted also get their point across? It can be very easy, working in group projects, back in education, I remember, very easy to just, the two most extroverted people out of a group of 6 basically lead, and everyone else kind of just follows, even if they're not happy with the approach. So how do you make sure that you're involving everybody and you're taking into consideration everyone's opinions, even if that means simply just asking someone that potentially hasn't spoken up, or maybe slightly more introverted in a group, what do you think about that? Do you think that's the right approach? Because sometimes people have tons of ideas, but they need to be invited into the conversation. And also, if you're somebody that potentially holds back, just remember that in a group, your opinions are just as important as everybody else's, and it might take a bit of a nudge for you to voice them, but that is kind of the only way that they're going to be heard, because you might always have someone that's going to be nudging and asking you, what's your opinion? And then secondly, is really just around remembering that, I guess this is more for one in the workplace, but you don't have to agree with everybody's point of view, you don't have to agree with everybody's opinion, but at the end of the day, if you are working towards a common goal for work, or even in your personal life, just remembering that you need to all show each other respect in order to get the kind of the accomplishment done. Sometimes it's about putting aside your personal opinion for kind of the greater good of a team. So even if potentially you are outnumbered 5 to 1, if you really stick to your point and you really think something should be done a certain way, but everybody else doesn't agree, sometimes it's just about saying, okay, for the good of the team, I'm going to put my opinion aside, and move on in a way that's going to make sure that we have a kind of a cohesive and a friendly working environment. And then lastly, just making sure that once the conversation is done, you wrap up. And this is something that I do a lot, and I've kind of been doing since I started my apprenticeship, was something that was taught to me, just around summing up any key points that need to be completed. And I do this at the end of kind of every meeting, or any kind of conversation I have with somebody in a professional context. Just summing up at the end, which goes back to the whole active listening piece. What are the actual takeaways? So at the end of every meeting with my manager, we have a one-to-one every week. I will say to her, okay, so just to make sure, this is what you need from me. This is when you need to buy it. Was there anything else? Just making sure you're on the same page as everything. If you're having that conversation, that's far easier. But if you're in a group project, ending every meeting or ending every session by saying, can we just go through everybody's actions just to make sure? Because often you'll find that I found over Teams meetings, things suggest and everyone puts their hand up and yeah, I'm happy to do that. That's fine. Put my name down for that. And then you send a follow-up email just to confirm, and suddenly, oh, actually, I'm super busy. I'm unable to do that, or thinking about it, this person would be better. So just making sure that you're summing up actions at the end so that everybody's on the same page, and they know and they're held accountable for what they've said they'd be happy to do. And then lastly, just cultural differences. So cultures, in terms of working with people from completely diverse backgrounds, but then also cultural differences in terms of the organizational culture of, joining a different kind of industry or a different kind of team or just a different company as a whole. So firstly, just remembering to kind of not necessarily judge people, but to take people based on what they do, and be open to communication with people rather than kind of falling back on negative stereotypes, basically. So just, taking people for what they do and what they say rather than some of the stereotypes that you may have about them, but practicing active listening with people. So you may have a kind of a stereotype in your head about what somebody may say or what somebody's approach may be to something based on a culture difference or based on kind of a preconception you may have. When you actually listen to what they're saying, it can be completely different from what your kind of mind pre-told you that they were going to say or they were going to sound like, or the information they were going to give you. So making sure that you kind of leave that bias, aside, or sometimes it is unconscious, but leave that bias and take people based on what they're saying by using active listening and really understanding the full message. And then lastly, just taking the time to get to know the organizational culture, where you're working. So for example, working on a shop floor in a retail store may be very different to the culture that you might find working in an accountancy firm. Taking the time to learn what is that kind of cultural difference, how do people communicate, how can I communicate to make sure that I get my point across best. Do people like to communicate via Teams more than having sit-down meetings? But learning what the culture is there, and then kind of adapting yourself where necessary to make sure that you're getting the most out of where you are, basically. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. I've seen a few questions come in, Chida. Am I okay just to answer them, or do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, no, you go for it. I'm glad you can see the questions because I've got a few as well that were sent this early this morning.
I've just moved you over. Let me get the questions back up. The first one we've got body language and communication. How was online working impacted on its significance? So I would say it kind of goes back to that whole bit of it's so much harder to read body language now, kind of virtually, and it's so much harder to get your point across. I went from working in an office kind of 9 to 5 where you go up to someone and you can tell from their body language instantly, are they having a good or bad day? Are they head down working? Maybe I don't want to go up to them and ask them this question that's going to lead, a new action from them. And you can instantly judge that, and you may adapt your approach, based on knowing what people's personalities are, knowing what your team are like. I have a friend who she works for an accountancy firm, and they did something called hot desking, which meant that every day she had a different desk, and every day she would sit with someone new and strike up a conversation with somebody. And she'd be able to kind of build on her network every day. She'd leave kind of the office every day having spoke to someone new for the most part. And that just doesn't exist anymore working virtually. So you don't know what kind of day someone's having. You can't read someone's body language, just by approaching them and seeing, should I leave them and maybe speak to them after lunch? Should I maybe send them an email? Is it okay to go over? But we've completely lost that now. So I would say it's I don't know about negatively impact, but it has definitely had an impact on how we work, and it just takes a little bit more thinking now. So the idea of the meetings as well has definitely rocked up. Something that we've seen in City and Guilds, whereas before, as I said, you may go over to someone, have a quick chat. Now you're putting in a 30-minute catch up, to speak to them about something. So people's diaries are getting a lot more full, and their days are starting to be populated far heavier than they would when they're in the office. So the second one is communication is a two-way process. If you have issues with others' communication at work, what tips and advice would you give in ways in which we can resolve these issues? So I would just say we have something at City and Guilds Group called Honest Conversations, which basically is a framework around how do you deliver honest criticism and also honest praise to somebody in a genuine way, and make sure that they are taken in the best way possible. So I would say it would always really start with thinking about what exactly is it about this person's communication that you have an issue with? Is it something that can easily be rectified? Is it that they aren't delivering messages in a way that is best for you? Is it that they are sending you 30 emails a day and it's too much? Is it that they constantly call you without scheduling meetings? So I'd say think about what is the actual issue that you're facing. Think about why they may be doing that. So are they delivering information in a way to you that is really short and sharp and you think it comes across a little bit too assertive and almost disrespectful, but they're simply delivering that because they have no time and they think that you're okay with information being received in that way? So just letting them know how you best like to receive information. So for example, I would rather somebody sends me a Teams message than sends me an email because it's better for me. And I have Teams on my phone, I can respond, and I'm way quicker at it. So if somebody's constantly emailing me, sometimes it's a little bit slightly eye roll. And I think, I wish you'd just message me on Teams. But if I haven't told anybody I'd wish you'd message me on Teams, how is anyone going to know? So make sure that you're communicating with people what your best communication style is. Would you rather have a meeting than someone send you an email to talk through something? Or do you hate meetings and speaking over the phone? Would you rather someone send you an email with a task? So think about your best way of communicating and then take that to the person. So rather than saying, when you do this, it's really disrespectful, say, I prefer to be communicated with in this way. Could you possibly communicate with me in this way, if that makes sense?
Great answers, Lauren. Love that. So one of the questions I've actually got two questions. One of them was, you mentioned about speaking with confidence. Do you have any practical tips? Because a lot of our bursary winners, they've probably never been in a work situation before and they've just had to sit on a Zoom or Teams meeting. Like what kind of practical steps can they take to actually come across confident?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely almost a fake it till you make it kind of situation, I'd say. So me, for example, I am a very much introverted person in my personal life. I wouldn't say that I'm at all confident, but I deliver sessions like this all the time and people will tell me, oh, you come across really confident and that you're happy to, and I'm super happy to do it. But it is all about kind of just dialing up the fact that when you're delivering information, you kind of going back to those 6 top tips and top skills that make a communicator, you want people to trust and believe what you're saying, and you trust and believe what people are saying if you're speaking in a positive tone and you're being enthusiastic about something and you're kind of dialing up all those kind of best things about your personality. So it definitely is something that takes practice. When I started as an apprentice 6 years ago at City and Guilds, I didn't speak to anyone. I came in, sat at my desk, did my work, took an hour lunch break, sat on my phone outside the office, came in, did the same thing, went home. I spoke to no one. And it really just does take time. So I'd say joining a new workplace and feeling nervous and not feeling confident is completely fine and it's normal. Nobody kind of expects you to turn up to work on the first day and start a conversation with everybody from your colleague to the CEO. No one expects that. But also speaking to people and allowing them to encourage you to meet new people was a really good one. So when I joined, I had a network of apprentices that really helped me because they were in some cases a lot more extroverted than I was, and they were having conversations with new people and bringing me into those conversations, so introducing me to people. So it was somebody else that I knew and somebody else that I was confident speaking to. So I think that's a really important one. So when you're joining a new place, if you know kind of 3 people there, get them to introduce you to 3 other people, if that makes sense. Then you start building your network and you find that the more people that you know, the more people you tend to be confident with, and then conversations just flow naturally. Before you know it, you have a network of, depending on how big the organization it is, but you have a network of 20, 30 people who, you're confident speaking to, and it may just be a quick hello, how was your weekend kind of chat, but it makes delivering information to the meeting so much easier because you kind of know that friendly face.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I like the idea of getting someone to introduce you to 3 people.
Yeah, it's so much easier than kind of going out there alone in yourself. Nobody wants to be the one that's approaching a random stranger and, hi, what's your name, like in a playground. But if you have that bridge and you have someone that knows that person already, it really can broaden your network.
Yeah. Great. Last question. Do you has something ever gone wrong with you, and like in any kind of communication, and how did you fix it?
Oh, every week. there's always something. I would say kind of virtually all the time. As I said, I live at home with my parents and my three siblings who are all in various stages of education. So my Wi-Fi is Virgin Media and it's terribly unreliable. So constantly having Wi-Fi drops. And it's something that can be really hard. And, doing presentations like this and having, your Wi-Fi drop before a big meeting, can be absolutely heartbreaking. But just, understanding that everybody goes through these things and communicate, going always back to communicating. Don't just sit there and let anybody know what's going on. Let people know what's going on, because they're far more likely to be able to help you, empathize with your situation, also respect you if you let them know struggling with this at the moment, trying my best to log on or whatever. And then in person, all the time of, delivering sessions before the pandemic. I used to often deliver sessions to young people in schools about apprenticeships. So going into schools and speaking to an assembly room of, 300 young people, you never know how that's going to go. Sometimes they're super interested and they have tons of questions. Sometimes I speak and, I can tell that nobody cares. And it's being able to, being able to balance that. So being able to think about your audience, think about who you're delivering to, and making sure that the information you're delivering is of use to the audience, because that's the first step, I guess, to making sure people are engaged, is that, are you talking about something that they care about? And if they don't care about it, how do you make it sound interesting, because they need to know it.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it, love it, love it. Great. I think that's the end of the session for us, and I don't think there's any more questions. Let me just double check. Yep, no, there's no more questions. Just finally, thanks to you, Lauren. I know I picked up many tips today as well. So this session, we'll upload it to our YouTube channel, and our bursarians will be able to view that over there. Look forward to seeing you again, Laura, whenever that is. I'm sure we're going to be speaking soon.
I'm
but
sure.
Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Shahida.
Thanks, Lauren. Take care. Bye-bye.